Greetings, fellow book lovers, and welcome back to Colin's Corner. Well, we have finally made it, guys, to the end of the year, and here is the obviously coveted by so many and difficult to make top 10 books of 2023 for me personally. Now, if you are a fan of the channel, you know what we're about to get into before we do the list, and that is, of course, the answer to the last Comedy with Colin segment, where I asked you guys to joke, what kind of shoes do spies wear? The answer? Sneakers. Alright, now that we have that out of the way, I would just like to go over the very minimal ground rules that I set for myself when developing this list and going over my reads for the year. And the only two real rules that I put in place for myself are no repeat authors and no rereads. So with that out of the way, let's get on with number 10. Number 10, guys, is going to be My Heart is a Chainsaw, book 1 in the Indian Lakes trilogy by Stephen Graham Jones. Now, Stephen Graham Jones was one of the biggest surprises as an author for me in 2023, and one of my goals last year for 2023 was to explore more horror authors other than Stephen King, because I had read a lot of Stephen King and I wanted to branch out. And I certainly did that. And Stephen Graham Jones is very swiftly becoming a new favorite contemporary horror author of mine. And in this first book in the Indian Lakes trilogy, My Heart is a Chainsaw, there are so many nods to classic slasher films and an obvious love and respect for the horror genre. And Stephen Graham Jones handles his love and respect for the genre in a way that is not cheesy at all. It is so much fun. And one of the things that stuck out the most to me when reading Stephen Graham Jones is that he has a very unique voice and a very unique style that clicked with me right away. I was very intrigued by the way that he portrayed scenes and the way that he chose to develop some of the characters in this trilogy, which isn't complete, by the way. Just the first two books are out, and the third one is going to be coming out in March of 2024, which I'm very excited about. But this was a very fun story with compelling main character. Jade Daniels is her name. And although there are tons of nod to classic horror and slasher films throughout the entirety of both of these first two books, I just want to make sure that you guys understand it is not necessary at all to be a horror movie buff or a slasher film buff to understand and be compelled by the plot of this story, because I'm no movie buff. Of course, I love watching some classic horror films, but I'm not the guy you come to when you need to know the name of an actor, exactly how a certain scene was portrayed and played out. I'm not that guy, and I still was able to appreciate Stephen Graham Jones's obvious, just pure love of the horror genre. And like I said, you don't need to understand that to be swept away by this story. Coming in at number 9 is The Way of Edan by none other than Dr. Philip Chase, fellow booktuber, and who I am proud to, I think, be able to call a friend at this point. And I've reviewed this first book on my channel, so I won't go into too much depth here. But this is the first book in Philip's trilogy, the Edan trilogy, which I believe has been in the making for over 20 years, which is amazing dedication to just the craft of his story and all of the love and the labor that Philip Chase put into not only this series, but especially this first book, shone through very, very brightly. There were a few characters that I loved getting to know and to spend time with in this world, and there was at least one character that I absolutely loved to hate. You guys know those characters where they're just so hateable, but still I loved reading these characters on the page because I was so moved by them, and they were really believable villains and truly, truly evil evil people. So this world and the magic were very, very intriguing, and Chase incorporated some very interesting spins on classic fantasy tropes and classic fantasy creatures that may take you by surprise, but it took me by surprise in the greatest way possible, and I really enjoyed Philip Chase's spin on some of these tropes and creatures that are so familiar to us that read this genre regularly. Overall, this was an absolutely beautiful blend between classic and modern fantasy, and books 2 and 3, The Prophet of Edan and The Return to Edan, are going to be read very early on in 2024 for me. Coming in at number 8, guys, we have Jade War, the second installment in the Greenbone Saga by Fonda Lee. I struggled with whether or not I was going to go with Jade Legacy, the third book in the series, or Jade War here, because I really am a sucker for an ending of a story, especially trilogies that just feel so neatly compacted. And I had some very slight issues with Jade Legacy that I didn't seem to have with Jade War, so ultimately I went with Jade War. Now, the Greenbone Saga as a trilogy was such a blast to read, and Fonda Lee really surprised me with how fresh this felt as an addition to the fantasy genre. It's Asian inspired, and the combat and the magic are heavily influenced by Lee's background in martial arts. And while there isn't a ton of action scenes throughout the Greenbone Saga, when we get them, they are so beautifully intimate and feel like a zoomed in view of the intricacies of battle and the physical nature of it, and these trained fighters who are highly precise and very good at what they do. It was so cool to just see a different spin on how an action scene is portrayed. Now, Fonda Lee also demonstrates some amazing command over character development, and I truly felt like I knew at least 4 or 5 members of her cast by the end of the trilogy as a whole. This second book specifically really expanded the world immensely, and the stakes felt so much higher going into Jade Legacy that I had to give Jade War the top spot in the trilogy. Coming in, guys, at number 7, Piranesi by Susanna Clarke. Now, this is a standalone book, which is always exciting for us fantasy and sci-fi fans who seem to get, I don't know if I want to say bogged down, but slightly burdened by the amount of series that we end up getting thrust into just by the nature of the genres that we enjoy reading. But this specific standalone book by Susanna Clarke was a tremendously unique and creative plot idea, and boldly different from Clarke's most popular book and her only other book that I've read in Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell, which again I loved, by the way. This is an extremely tough book to talk about at all, because one of the pillars of enjoyment that this book stands on is the sheer mystery and enigmatic nature of it. The main character we follow, his name is Piranesi. They are contagiously curious about the world around them, and their habits of observation and ability to be ultimately resourceful with the limited amount of materials in their environment is just fascinating to read about. If you are in the mood to just really take a step out of your comfort zone and have a truly unique experience, then I highly suggest picking up Piranesi. And on top of all of this, if you aren't already excited enough, it's very short, especially for the genre that I particularly like to read, fantasy. It comes in at under 250 pages. Working our way towards the top 5, at number 6, we have Watership Down by Richard Adams. Now, I know, strange pick for almost my top 5, but let me explain why it's here for me. I had no preconceived notions of this book going into it. I had never seen the animated series and had never consumed this story before in any way. I randomly chose it from one of my library apps, I think it was Cloud Library, to listen to on audio. And while Stephen Graham Jones was one of my biggest surprises as an author in 2023, Watership Down was just one of the biggest surprises for me, period, all year. I never anticipated becoming so emotionally attached to characters that were all rabbits. Literally, almost all of the characters we follow in this book are either rabbits or an animal of some kind. And following these rabbits down on their level, thinking like Richard Adams assumed rabbits must think, was such a different perspective than anything that I've read. And one thing that surprised me the most about this one is that the stakes were extremely high for these little animals. And I was 100% invested in where they were all individually going to end up and where their group that we are following was going to end up. This story is filled with some evil, bad rabbits, some truly inspiring leaders, rabbits stepping up and showing some real grit and courage, and some amazing climactic moments. Adams also displayed incredible imagination in creating a unique rabbit language which contains some really creative words and references to humans and items in the human world from the perspective of rabbits that really got me to think about how us humans just kind of move into a nature area and recreate it to be exactly how we want or we need it to be without any consideration to other living creatures already existing there. And if you have for some reason not read Watership Down for school at some point or with your kids or whatever it may be, I think it's absolutely worth adding it to the TBR and giving it a read or a listen. The audiobook was absolutely fantastic and very engaging. Alright guys, we are cracking into the top 5, and coming in at number 5 is Project Hail Mary by Andy Weir. I let the hype on this one die out a bit before I finally picked it up, and I wish I hadn't in a way, but I'm also kind of glad that I did in a way because it's really easy to get swept up in the just utter chaos that some books get into on BookTube and just kind of sweep through and take the community by storm. I benefited, I think, a lot from this being my first Andy Weir book. I have not read The Martian, so I had nothing to compare it to while I was reading it. I was able to just fully release my inhibitions and immerse myself in Andy Weir's writing and his story. It's extremely high stakes, which I guess is a thing for Andy Weir. Like, the future of the world is at stake, and its fate is largely in the hands of one man. So tensions are high, you could say. There's a ton of inner monologue throughout a large portion of this book, and I think Weir did a tremendous job of depicting what many of our thoughts might consist of if we were in the shoes of our main character, Ryland Grace. I do not specifically recommend audiobooks over physically reading, hardly ever, but this is one of the rare cases that I highly suggest consuming this story via audiobook if you are someone who can enjoy stories in this style. Audiobooks don't work for everyone, and I totally understand that. But if they do work for you, do this one on audio. There is a specific aspect of Project Hail Mary that was done so immersively on audio, and it enhanced the story so much for me. This book had me shouting and cheering, clenching my seat in worry, and yes, even brought tears to my eyes, although I will not tell you what kind of tears, because I don't want to be spoilery in any way. This story was so much fun and compelling to me, and if you haven't read it yet, I highly suggest adding this one to your list. Alright, coming in at number 4, these always have a tough time focusing on the camera. Let's see if it works. Come on. A Storm of Swords, book number 3 in A Song of Ice and Fire by, of course, George R.R. Martin. Now, wow. This is the third book, like I said, so I can't talk too much about the plot, but the sheer amount of potentially world-altering events that happen in just this one book is jaw-dropping. and none of it felt like it was there for shock value. It all felt like it had a purpose. It all felt like it was intricately planned out by Martin, and it had me absolutely floored. So much backstabbing, politicking, plotting, power grabbing, alliance forming, and alliance shattering actions take place by the insanely large cast of characters in this series. And everybody is out to protect themselves in this world of Martins where trust does not come cheap if it comes at all. I loved how many of the character arcs in this specific book developed, and we got to follow many of my personal favorite character POVs in A Storm of Swords, so that aspect of this book worked really, really well for me. I have continued on and read the fourth book, A Feast for Crows, but this one definitely took the cake for me this year, and I read all four of the A Song of Ice and Fire books that I have read so far all this year. So I guess it's safe to say that as far as my favorite of the series goes, it would be A Storm of Swords as of right now. Cracking into the top three, guys, coming in at number 3, Dead House Gates, book number 2 of the Malazan, Book of the Fallen by Steven Erikson. There is an extreme tonal shift from book 1, Gardens of the Moon, to book 2, Dead House Gates. Erikson does not shy away from jumping right into some absolutely harrowing events right in the prologue, and this tone, this really heavy, weighty tone, continues throughout the entirety of this book. Dead House Gates is where I personally really began gaining my footing with the Malazan Book of the Fallen, and really feeling like I was able to put some things together and understand what was going on just a little bit better. I loved Gardens of the Moon, and I'm currently in the middle of Memories of Ice, so Memories of Ice could have possibly made this list, but I will not finish it before the end of the year. I was absolutely glued to these pages in Dead House Gates from the beginning to the end, and it is one of the most riveting fantasy novels I have ever read, period. I continue to just be in awe of what Erikson is able to accomplish as a storyteller, and he tackles some of the weightiest themes I've ever read in such a professional and nuanced manner. And I cannot wait to continue in my Malazan journey and see just where the story is going, because I feel like in many ways, even on book 3, that I'm just scratching the surface of what this world Erikson has created has to offer me. Number 2, guys, is going to be The Return of the King, the concluding book in the Lord of the Rings trilogy or story, however you want to view it. No, this was not a reread, believe it or not. I completed the last leg of the Lord of the Rings for the first time just this January, which feels crazy to me, feels so long ago, but I was simply enamored with this world, and I gotta be honest, I cannot wait to reread the Lord of the Rings already. Even though I knew basically all the details of how the story goes, simply by the nature of the movies and just general pop culture knowledge, I was still blown away by this series as a whole and how it ended with Return of the King. I now see how and why Tolkien has been such a huge inspiration for many of my favorite authors that I read today. And I thought that the ending of Lord of the Rings was absolutely beautiful, and the ride was just incredible through and through. I have absolutely nothing negative to say at all about the series, and I will continue reading about Tolkien's magical world again and again, and just exploring all of the nooks and crannies that it has to offer. Alright guys, we have finally made it to my favorite read of 2023. Some of you may know this answer if you've been following my channel closely, especially recently. Coming in at number 1, guys, we have Fool's Fate, the third book in the Tawny Man trilogy by Robin Hobb. Not only is this my favorite read of 2023, but it has now become my favorite book of all time. It is the first time I have ever closed the cover of a book and been able to truly, definitively say and believe within myself, this is my favorite book I've ever read. Note, I did not say this is the best book I've ever read, but it is Colin's favorite book he's ever read. This is the third book in a trilogy that is basically smack dab in the middle of a 16-book series, so I can't say much at all about the plot, but I can talk about how this book affected me. Robin Hobb, with all of the books about Fitz chivalry farseer that I've read so far, has managed to create a character and cast of characters around Fitz that have connected with me more than any other characters I've ever read. And I've been moved emotionally and deeply impacted by following Fitz along this journey so far. I've learned about friendship, parenthood, loyalty, perseverance, trust, loss, lofty success, and almost everything in between, all through this very intimate first-person narrative. And I feel like I know Fitz better than I know many people in real life, which is just truly a testament to how talented an author Robin Hobb is, especially when it comes to developing her characters. If you haven't read any Realm of the Elderlings books yet, and you are a fantasy literature fan, I really think you should at least give the Farseer trilogy a shot, which is the very first trilogy in the Realm of the Elderlings series. I realize that Robin Hobb's style may not work for everybody, may not land as well as it did and does continue to land for me as I work my way through this series, but that's okay. It seems to me that for those that it does click with, for those that do resonate with the way that Robin Hobb tells her story and develops her world and her characters, more often than not, people feel very similarly to how I end up feeling and how I have grown to feel about this world and the characters that she's created. And so, yes, to round out my top 10 with number 1, we have Fool's Fate by Robin Hobb. So that is going to do it, guys. This surprisingly was not as hard as my mid-year list, so the favorite books that I read for the first half of the year. And I was dreading this a little bit because I thought it might be really difficult. But as I was going through my list of books that I've read this year, this list in the order kind of just sorted itself out. Like my heart just kind of knew the answers. And so that part of it was really easy. And I love reflecting back and just thinking about all these stories that meant so much to me over the course of the year. So what I want to hear about in the comments is, what are some of your favorite reads of the year? What is your top 5? What is your top 10? What is your top whatever? What is just a book that really impacted you that you think you're going to think about and want to revisit, in the future, and you can't get it out of your head? I want to hear about it in the comment section. Did we share any impactful books? Because I would love to talk about your thoughts on some of the books that might have overlapped in my reading journey and yours. If you have stuck around this long, you are privileged to experience the final Comedy with Colin joke, more than likely, unless I get one more video out. But I think this is going to be the last joke for Comedy with Colin of 2023. Today's joke is going to be, what do you call a policeman in bed? If you think you know the answer, add it to your comment. Guys, I hope you all had as amazing as a reading journey as I did in 2023. And if you did, I hope that continues for you in 2024. If you are new to the channel and you have not been here before, please make sure to hit subscribe and be active in the comments. I respond to every single comment. I love talking to you guys. That is why I started this channel. So don't forget to subscribe. Don't forget to like this video. I hope you guys are all enjoying what you're currently reading, and remember, you're always welcome in Colin's Corner.